I'm JJ Perez with Inside Runner Sports. That is Greg Luca, San Antonio Express News, coming to you to wrap up week 6 of the UTSA football season. Greg, week 6. The Roadrunners are 2-3 following a one score loss to Temple. Greg, where do you want to start here? A tale of two halves in Philadelphia, right?
I was gonna say you sound pretty somber, which I guess is about kind of where we're at
I
here at
got some
UTSA
allergy
fans.
issues going on
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, don't you all you UTSA fans with your allergies this week? I'm sure it is. That's the issue. So yeah, the tale of two halves is one way to put it for
Yeah.
sure. Obviously, the first couple drives was as good as we saw UTSA's
Yeah.
offense look this season, and an Owen McCown, who I'm sure we'll talk about a lot, was really kind of rolling at a pretty high level, and it felt like, that's the part of the game where they script it, and it seemed like everything that they had drawn up was kind of clicking in a pretty significant way, and then suddenly you come back, and the second half just looks like a totally different team, and you can see the narrative from Temple's side pretty easily with the Keeler's halftime speech about the embarrassment in the first half, and they came out with so much more fight and this, that, and whatever. So it almost feels like it's a Temple story more than a UTSA story, but
Right.
certainly there are parts of this that are reminiscent of, and it's not quite the Tulsa game last year, but there's things where you've seen when UTSA is out of the gates pretty slow. There's some things that have been disappointing about this that were probably pretty familiar. So there's a lot of different areas we can dive into. I'm sure we will, but you can tell us where you want to start.
I want to start with the defense because in the first half, it looked like they were just dominant in the trenches, right? Just Temple couldn't do much of anything. And then in the second half, I guess there was a bad punt, a penalty, a long run, and just some situations where it's like all of a sudden you know, this thing flipped over, and I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, Temple put the one strong drive together coming out of halftime.
Hmm.
And I think we saw particularly that the tight end, Peter Clark, with his size, gave UTSA a lot of problems
Yeah, that was
defensively.
a bad matchup.
There just wasn't much that felt like they could do against him, which, I understand if that's pretty alarming where you feel like if Temple's tight end is going to give you this much issues, like what does that mean about this defense and the state of the season? But it is just sort of the case of a guy like Kendrick Blackshire is not necessarily known as a coverage player, and then the
Right.
safeties are a little short, even by FBS standards. So that's just a tough situation for them to try to match up with when that's probably the one of the top two or three pass catching options on the other team, if not number one. So that was certainly a matchup that proved problematic. And the other thing that happened in that third quarter was the big run that they broke after the interception. And it seemed like Chad Banks said after the game that they had trouble getting the call relayed. Watching it back, it didn't look like at the snap that there was any kind of scrambling or that guys didn't know what they were supposed to do. But certainly you saw that a couple guys on the front kind of slanted to the left, and then that created an opening where Chad had to sort of jump outside to try to get around his blocker, and then that leaves a free lane. And Jimmy Wyrick went for the sweep action, so there was no safety to kind of
Yeah.
pick up in the back end. And so just like that, you hit Temple hits a big run, and suddenly the game is kind of completely swung. So defensively, I do think overall it was probably a middle of the road performance. I don't think that
Right.
there's going to be anything necessarily huge to take away on that side from either end. I still can't believe, they only play three corners the whole game. That we've talked about that. They just don't have a ton of guys there. It's not like they got killed through the air, but that's still every time I look at the stats, that becomes more and more surprising. And then we talked about the defensive or the will linebacker position quite a lot, and Nana didn't play a ton of snaps in this game, and I don't know if that's just sort of the pitch count thing. We saw a lot of Vic Shaw, who started the game after Nana started last week, and Vic Shaw ended up playing more than him. And obviously Nana's really effective when he's out there. So the more that he's involved in the game, the better it feels like. But that was not a huge amount this week.
To me, the most critical point of the game came, and I know there were a few opportunities UTSA's offense had to take the lead or win the game in a 2 minute or 4 minute drive. But to me, the most critical part of the game was early in that fourth quarter where they do the dial up this trick play to Owen, and you've seen UTSA kind of give up this lead, but then they come back and take the lead, and then Temple retakes the lead, and it looks like UTSA is going in for a touchdown, and they dial this double pass throwback to Owen. He's got a wall of blockers, and it looked like he might have been able to walk into the end zone. Somebody got through, tackled him. The next play, the ball's tipped and intercepted, and that was probably the moment where it was like, oh, UTSA is really going to lose this one.
Yeah, well, quickly before I get into that, the little bit of razzle dazzle we saw from this team in different phases of the game. There was earlier in the game. There was the handoff, reverse, flea flicker kind of deal that they went for. And there was a play very early on where Robert Henry and Devin McCown were both lined up at essentially like fullback depth.
Yeah.
And they handed off to Robert Henry on sort of this fullback dive. And so, we continue to talk about the offensive coordinator, and we will, I'm sure, as we get into this video further. But I at least enjoy that they are coming off a bye week, sort of willing to pull out some fancy stuff and try to do some things to create a spark where it seems like it might not be happening more organically. So obviously that's just a small part of the job. But you mentioned the deflected interception, which I do believe was kind of the play of the game. If that goes differently, then UTSA probably wins this one. Now, it Owen said he was really happy with the read and he felt like Devin McCown was open. It looked to me like he was covered. That could have easily been an incomplete pass either way. But based on the way the safety had crept up into the box and the way that they played the run action, you understand why they're always going to throw that one. So
Yeah.
that could have been a touchdown. But more importantly, even if it just gets batted down, it's 1st and 10, or it would be 2nd and 10 at that point from the 15. And you have a couple more plays to work with to try to get in the end zone or even to kick a tying field goal in that situation if you feel like you can't get the yards you need to actually get close to the game-winning touchdown. So it seemed like that was really where the game swung, and you understand why, because a play like that is just so deflating when, offensively, you've had some drives that went pretty well. You had your two most methodical drives of the
Yeah.
season in the first half, but you also had somewhere, especially down the stretch there, it just felt like they weren't able to get it clicking at the same level. And so to have that something where you're so close to being able to punch it in and potentially swing the game in your favor, and even then, like they had that touchdown drive right after Temple took the lead where Owen found McEwen, and it was one of his best plays of the day. So they shown that they could move the ball down the field in spurts, but then with how difficult that fourth quarter was, even looking back at it in hindsight, having that play not go their way was hugely deflating and made a big difference in the outcome.
Yep. What do we make about the play of the offense? I guess specifically in the second half. I mean, the in the two drives they had was the first half was very long-winded, right? Like all of the drives were super long, so there weren't a lot of opportunities, but UTSA made the most of their offensive opportunities in the first half, but not in the second half. And I think they probably went away from the run a little bit too soon. It did seem like Temple was doing a good job stacking the box, right, and shutting that down. But apparently there were some availability issues with Robert Henry in the second half.
Yeah, Coach Triller was just telling us that there was maybe some hydration situation with him where he wasn't out there as often as they would have otherwise had him out there. I didn't think it was super glaring until you got to about the drive that started around 5 minutes of the fourth quarter and Will
Yep.
Henderson was in there, because other than that, they had just kind of alternated, which is not entirely unusual. But then you get down to sort of crunch time like that, and you would expect that you'd have Robert Henry on the field. So, and especially because it's just anecdotal. It was just a couple cases, but Will Henderson, I think, probably wants a couple plays back in terms of the pass blocking part of it.
Yeah.
And even though you think of Henry as a runner and maybe in a passing situation, it's not
He's a
as
decent
essential to have him
blocker.
out there. He does a pretty good
Yeah.
job with that part of it too, from what I've seen. So I think that certainly hurt them in that stretch, not having him fully available, and changed probably how they game plan a little bit, because he's a guy where we've seen that they're pretty confident, even if it's like a 3rd and medium or almost 3rd and long, even that they can give it to him on a draw play and feel like he might be able to go get it, and that they've had some success doing that as much as the people hate it. So I think that it changed their offense quite a bit to not have him out there. And when we talk about what went wrong in general, I do look at the run game first. I think there's a lot of times where maybe something happens with Owen that people look at and they say, "Oh, that was not a good play," and they're upset at him. But it's a lot of times it's because they're in 3rd and 8, because the play before it was this 2 yard run, and you're not thinking much about a 2 yard run because you see plenty of 2 yard runs, but they had way too many 2 yard runs in this game where it put them behind the sticks, I thought.
Yeah, let's talk about the play of quarterback Owen McCown. Jeff Traylor says on Monday that there is no way in hell he's considered benching him, that has not even been discussed or even thought about. He went on to say before that he thought he actually played pretty good in this game. Greg, how do you evaluate the play of Owen in the conference opener?
Well, why would there be a conversation about benching? This is, to me, I've been here since 2018. This is the most asinine idea that has got this many people behind it. I have no The backup has thrown 2 passes in his career. Like, we have no reason to believe that it would be any better than a guy who finished in the top 15 in the country in passing last season. And yes, the downfield passing has been really bad this year. I don't It's hard to explain why, because Owen wasn't so good at that, or wasn't struggling with that last year. There was a lot of times where that hit at a pretty high level. I think on 20 plus. He's only like 4 for 21, if I'm remembering that correctly,
Yeah.
from the Pro Football Focus. And so no, that's not good, but it's not a huge sample either. There's got to be a reason that they're not attempting that at a higher level. And I almost wonder if Owen is hurt because we know that he's a pretty tough guy who has not shied away from taking hits. And there's been times, including the bad interception he threw yesterday, or on Saturday, where it felt like he was trying to get rid of the ball a little earlier than he needed to because he didn't want to absorb some contact. And I don't think that's like a pansy quarterback scared to get hit thing. Like he's not that guy. We've seen him be willing to stand in and take some contact when he needs to, but it almost felt like he's protecting himself out of necessity. And so they would never tell us that. And I don't have any kind of inside information on that, but just watching, it was especially evident against Colorado State. The interception that he threw was a play where he was trying to protect himself. And so, if you don't like Owen, I think the easiest stat to look at is his yards per attempt is really low this year. I pulled it just a second ago. So out of 156 quarterbacks with at least 14 pass attempts per game, Owen's number 124 with 5.7 yards per attempt, which is really, really bad. But a lot of that I think comes down to the downfield passing, which is missing more from a design perspective than from anything that he's doing, at least in my opinion, because he's still completing 63.4% of his passes. And so when I'm watching these games back and I'm trying to grade Owen or see what he's doing, how many times in a game do they throw some 4 yard completion? And I'm like, I guess that's what he was supposed to do on that play. Like that looks like that's what's available to them, but that's not leading to productive offense and something that's creating a formidable passing game or something that's keeping the fans happy in terms of Owen's performance. And so I do think there's some room for criticism with him, but to your point, this was, the first two drives was as well as we've seen him play. And then
Yeah.
even that drive in the second half, the three made to McCown. And,
Yeah.
there's plays people are critical about that are really good. Like,
Yeah.
I think it was the last drive of the game where he had that play where he had to evade a free rusher, which was, we just talked about it. That was a blitz pickup that Will Henderson missed. And then he had to spin around again the other way and get
Yeah.
himself turned towards the sideline like 20 yards. And it was such an unlikely throw that the camera didn't even watch it
Right.
because like
And it
it was
was a
just like you're not
completion.
supposed to. Yeah, and it set up like a 4th and 2 where now they
Yeah.
had a chance to make. So I mean, I really only think there was maybe 5 bad throws in this game. Like
Right.
the interception we know was bad. There was 2 in the second quarter. He had the one where it sort of hit the cornerback, and if
Yeah.
that guy was looking, that might have been a pick. And he sailed one to Houston
Right.
Thomas
Over
on
the
the
middle.
last
Yeah.
drive. That
Yeah.
was pretty critical. And um, I'm not placing the other 2 right now, but I remember going through it after the game and thinking there was only 4 or 5 times that he was really off the mark. And so, you can nitpick decisions here and there. One of them that I pointed out was on that same drive right after he hit the cornerback. There's like a deep, I don't want to, it's not mesh because it's too far down the field, but there was like 2 crossing patterns in the intermediate range, and he just sort of picked the wrong guy. Like one guy came free going left, and Owen threw to the guy going right. So that was one where he missed a potentially big play down the field. But, generally, at that point, you're asking him to be perfect. I don't think.
Right.
I mean, where are you with? I've just been talking for like 5 minutes here. Where are you with Owen at this point?
I'm somewhere in the middle, right? Obviously, he's not as good as he was at the end of last season, but
Sure,
I,
sure.
I, I think he's out there battling, right? I mean, he in that first half, he was dealing. He looked as good as he's looked all season long. And the offensive line has been good this year, but he's still taking some shots, right? And he's a tough kid. And, there was a third down pickup he picked up where he dove head first. And I just feel like he's playing well enough to win, but he's not playing good enough for to elevate the team. And I don't know if it's receivers, if it's tight end play. I think there's been an issue up to this point with receiver availability. You look at the downfield component. Who's the downfield threat? Like who is it? Willie McCoy? I mean,
He didn't even play, right?
right. So where is that at? Where is that? Is it a combination of all the offense? And the other thing this will transition to is it play calling, right? I don't know that the play calling has been terrible, but there have been some plays where it's like, okay, they're going to run a screen again. And even Jeff Traylor said today he thought that was not a great call on a third down screen late in the game. So I think it's just a combination of both. I think you're going to get maybe a little bit better play from Owen as the season goes on, but is that going to be enough to elevate the team when you have kind of these one score games that UTSA used to win, but now they're not? So, I mean, where does play calling factor in for you, Greg?
Well, yeah, to your point about the deep threat, first, the there was another scenario in this game that we've seen a couple times this season where, McEwen's running kind of a fade pattern down the right sideline and Owen ends up throwing it way over his head. And it's, did who's responsible for them not being on the
Right.
same page? And that comes down to we've talked about, and Jeff Traylor talked about last week, the receivers not practicing as much, and so that chemistry is not there. And especially with McEwen and McCown and how much they've
Right.
worked together and both being East Texas guys and all the stuff they do in the offseason, you would expect that their communication would be at a high level. But once you get into the actual live bullets, as they say, and just kind of executing the calls that you've repped in practice, if you're not out there on the practice field, it gets a little bit tougher to be on the same page, no matter how good your rapport is personally. So I think that that's obviously something that we've seen come into play, and that leads to some things that seem like poor throws from Owen, even if it's not necessarily something he's doing wrong as much as just a communication issue. And so, to your point about the play calling, I do think that, yeah, it's like I mentioned a little earlier. Sometimes it feels like Owen makes the right read for the situation and connects the throw, but it's not getting them anywhere.
Yeah.
This play is designed to get 4 yards and they got 4 yards, and maybe we need to, have a play that's designed to get 8 yards. I just feel like there's more, whether it's something that he's taking that underneath route too readily, which I think we've talked about at times in the past, or if it's just that that's how that's being defended and they need to be able to dink and dunk, but just
Yeah.
always have that, just hit that at an even higher percentage. There's something that is missing that they haven't been able to get going downfield. And you would just think with the success of the running game that would be more open than ever. This game notwithstanding, because obviously they didn't run the ball at the same kind of a level, but generally speaking, you would think there'd never been an easier year than this to have that downfield passing game get established just because the respect for Robert Henry and the way defenses have to look at him is probably unlike anything we've talked about since Sincere McCormick was here, right? So you would think that that would open up a lot of different options for Owen, and it just hasn't felt like they've been able to capitalize on that. And again, it's not, I still don't feel like it's something that Owen's not doing. It feels like that's just, so that's where I would be critical of the play calling, is it just seems like they're not finding a way to create, the downfield opportunities, much less the connections.
For me, where I think the biggest area that can be improved, look, UTSA is just not going to be able to start throwing the ball 30 yards down the field in the rest of the season. But where they can attack, I feel like, is the intermediate stuff, 10, 15 yards. I feel like there's a little bit more opportunity there. And that's where I would point to where you could scheme some stuff up, maybe get some tight ends more involved, maybe try and get Amador across the middle or something. Um, Today, we asked Jeff Traylor if he's considered changing who calls the offensive play, and he said no. So, what do you make of that, Greg?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you raise with the tight ends, just because we've talked a lot about that group, and especially with the receiver health being in question, you would think that that would be an area where you could see more of those guys. And they combined for 5 catches in this game, the three of them, and that
Yeah,
seems like that's about what we're used to seeing for
right.
whatever reason, where we thought that would potentially be. So when you talk about the intermediate stuff, and I think Owen has a strong enough arm, but without super elite NFL caliber arm strength, a lot of times you see guys really like to look at that over the middle stuff because it's just a shorter throw. And I'm surprised that the tight ends haven't been able to get more involved in and allow for more of that. So that is something that I think that is worth looking at and considering. In terms of changing the play caller, that's a huge step at the middle of the season that you can't unchange.
Yeah,
Once you've decided that you're going to do that, you've essentially fired your offensive coordinator. And I know every that a lot of people would be happy with that, but by the end of last year, the same people who were clamoring for that kind of stuff at this point, 5 games into the season, were pretty happy with the way the offense was looking. And statistically, it makes sense because they were, top 15, top 10 offense by the end of the year. So it just seemed like I think you can understand Jeff Traylor's willingness to be patient because he's seen the same offensive coordinator and the same quarterback figure this out last year. It's not like you have to go way deep into the memory banks or that you're trying to recreate something that happened with a different staff and different players. You've seen that this duo of offensive coordinator and quarterback can produce for you. And so it's just a matter of finding whatever answer it is. And I guess if you have to look for the answer for that long, that's part of the reason people are
right.
upset. Right? Like I get it, but it'd be one thing if you had never seen these two be able to produce at this level, and that's
Yeah.
just not the case.
Greg, where are we at from a big picture perspective of what this season holds? I guess the expectation conversation. And I think that's really where it most of the fan frustration comes in at because they expected to be able to compete against Tulane and Memphis, teams that are ranked in the top 25 this year, and there's struggles against Temple, who is one of the bottom schools. Does the fan base need to readjust their expectations this year?
Well, I'm glad you framed it in terms of the expectations because it only adds to the point that I wanted to make where, people are very up in arms about the start to this season. And I'm not saying like 2-3 is good, but what wasn't last year just way more disappointing in every way? And that worked out all right. Because like you just stack it up game for game, or even start from what you said, the expectations. Like they came into last year thinking they could be a CFP team. And the expectations that they set for themselves, and at least how they talked about it, were not at that same level this year. So already you're kind of starting at a lower baseline in terms of that part of it. But then not to dig up some painful memories, but like the loss to Texas State last year was the worst loss they've taken that I can remember. And the comeback against Tulsa was so much worse than this comeback against Temple. And even just losing to Rice last year is worse than anything that's happened so far this season. And that's all part of this, like what I think it was a 3-5 start or whatever it was last
Yeah.
year. So I from my perspective, you're allowed to get mad because your team's underperforming. That's 100% accurate and fine. But I do think that it's important to keep the perspective that, in my opinion, they've hit a lot lower points than this last year and turned out the season in a way that everyone was happy with. So to then be able to feel like you should jump ship now seems premature when I guess to your point as well, this was probably one of the easier games on the schedule and you would expect that you win this one. Um, I don't know. This is probably a bit of a reach, but we might find out that Temple's not that bad. Like they've only lost to top 20 teams this season,
Yeah.
and it's a new coach and they've turned over a lot of stuff. So we could look up at the end of the year and feel like Temple was a pretty decent team. So I don't know. I think there's just a lot of room for optimism just based on last year if you really want to take that route, but there's also room obviously to be disappointed. I'm curious your stance on last year versus this year and how that kind of informs your feelings right now.
A 7-win season is a good win, a good year in the G5, right? So if you're starting there, that's to me that's the baseline, right? Some people will say, well, that's just bowl eligibility, you're gonna get this is the G5. I mean, unless you're Boise State winning 10 games, and even they're not even winning 10 games every year. It's difficult. So I think you're gonna see this continual up and down season to season. And I mean, from just what I see on the football field, I get the frustration with the penalties, the special teams, but I mean, if Owen could get to where he was half of where he was last season, you got to think there's a handful of wins out there still left for this team. And for me, that's exciting.
Well, I just thought, even the team I thought just looked worse last year, just in terms of some of the stuff that you would see just play to play of guys who looked like they weren't necessarily as well coached or as well organized or that they were all on the same page. I don't think you see as much of that. It's just that maybe it's a part of the way that it's happening based on the expectations
Right.
because this was supposed to be a team that was hugely productive offensively and maybe the defense was going to struggle a little bit. And so if they were losing these games 50-40, maybe it would be a little bit different. But just because the part that fans would have most expected to thrive at a high level is the part that's sort of letting them down to this point in the season, maybe that creates a little bit more of a harsher feeling. I mean, everybody loves offense, right? So I think that that's kind of hurting their case a little bit here.
That and I mean those style of offense that they've kind of adapted, it's not real fun to watch, right? I mean, unless Robert Henry's breaking the 75-yard run.
Right, right. Well, and it's again, and this is a case where it's not particularly effective either. So it's a stylistic thing and it's a results thing too. But yeah, I think there was sort of like one of the things that I have been trying to be reactive to the stuff that fans are concerned about and ask about it, even if I think it's maybe not the most worthwhile question. And we saw some of that this morning. I hope you guys who are wanting those things go listen to that interview. And if there's anything else, obviously send it our way. But I think we
Let
tried
us know.
we tried to hit a lot of the points that you guys
Yeah.
want to hit. And one of the things that people talked about that I didn't feel like I could really get to is just, there's this idea of like you should beat Temple by double digits. And I just can't,
Yeah.
I don't know how I can get at that with the coach because he's not gonna he respects Temple more than that, more than
Right.
you guys do, right? Like, I don't think he sees that UTSA is is necessarily a completely different kind of programmer, is inherently at a much higher level. And I don't know exactly what, is spent by both programs. At When I did that analysis a few years ago, Temple actually spent a lot more relative to the rest of the league than I would have thought based on their results. And maybe that's not
Yeah.
surprising because they've gone through some periods where they had some success. So what I'm trying to say is I don't it's ambitious to look at UTSA as a UTSA fan and be like, we're above them.
No,
You
it's
know,
pretty
that's
even. It's
I mean
pretty even out there.
that's just asking a lot. So that's based on results rather than the of recent years rather than like the process and what gets put into it. Like so I think that's why and I think in defense of Jeff Traylor too, he as much as he says he's never on social media or whatever, he clearly saw, I think, some of the response to his comments after the game and people who want a little bit more fire from him and said, it's just he's one way with his players and with his team, and he's a different way publicly.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's just a level of understanding that that's probably why when he says you're going to get into a lot of close games and then you're going to see what happens that this is just sort of one of those situations that Temple is a team that why not? Why would they not be on a similar level on the road? Like, what is it that makes the fans say UTSA just should be able to walk in there and beat them by double digits, other than just the success that Jeff has built? So that's just something that I don't know. Maybe the fans are right and maybe I'm wrong, but I sort of see I just sort of see the perspective of, this game inherently just could be an even matchup on paper.
I think it's like that in all the G5 games. You even look at, going back to the Texas State loss, right? People felt like, UTSA should be ahead of Texas State as a program, and it's unacceptable to lose to them. And maybe last year's game, the manner in which they lost to that. But I mean, all these games are going to be close games. And if you do come up with a two-score win, you were just that much better that day. And I don't know that there's any team on UTSA's schedule who is going to be an easy win from here on out, Greg.
Well, and listen, man, like I have things I'm passionate about too, and I don't talk about them rationally. Like that's half the fun.
Yes,
You even get
yes,
like people who are coming after Jeff this week. And I think it made me think back to when we were doing all this stuff with his contract extension, I got made fun of a little bit because I was the guy who was like, they won a lot of these close games. Like that could have gone either way. Are you sure you want to give this guy a 10-year contract? And I feel like I had to walk that back because he's done an outstanding job. I think he's built a
yeah,
really strong program and proven that to some extent his success is sustainable. But now we are seeing sort of what it looks like when it goes the other way and how drastically that can change people's opinion because they just haven't had the same level of success in close games, and what they had done in those scenarios wasn't sustainable. And if you want to make it like a Frank Harris versus Owen McCown thing because Frank's got magic powers, like I can't argue with that either. He sort of
right.
proved that over the years, but I do think that there's just some extent of you just kind of got lucky in those situations. Like we go back to what was the year where if UAB went for it on 4th and 1, like is everything different? So I think that it's just you give him the so I guess you're just evening it out, right? Because he got all the
Right.
credit in the world when they won those, and now he gets all the blame in the world where they
Right.
lost. I still feel like I'm somewhere in the middle.
Greg, the Roadrunners are 2-3, 0-1 in league play. They got Rice coming into the Alamo Dome for a home game. Feels like a must win this week.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting way to put it, just because the schedule gets so much tougher.
Yep.
And you asked Jeff if something along the lines of if he expects another close game, and of course he said he does. So we'll see there. I haven't, dove into Rice yet. It felt like early in the year their results were probably a little bit better than expected under a new
Yep.
coach, and
First year head coach.
they're doing this option gimmick, and so we'll see to what extent UTSA is able to adapt to that and how that creates challenges for them. So, yeah, I mean, I think as you're saying, to go at North Texas, home against Tulane, and at South Florida after that,
It's pretty good. Big
if you
gauntlet there.
if you don't get this one, then it starts to look pretty bleak. And so must win. I was thinking must win for what, but
Yeah.
I guess we're
Bowl
talking bowl
eligibility.
eligibility,
Right.
where that really is kind of a something I had personally kind of taken for granted, and it looks like a concern now because you feel pretty good about Rice and you feel really good about Charlotte. But
Yeah.
even then, that's a road game. I don't know what kind
East
of form
Carolina, you never
in that.
know.
Based on the average trajectory of the UTSA season and what we saw
Right.
last year, it
Home
would
game.
not be super surprising if at the end of the year they can beat Charlotte and East Carolina and Army. But sad part, if you're a UTSA fan, is that might be what you have to do to get to 6-6. Like
Yeah.
it just sort of depends how these next few games go. So I do think, yeah, to your point, I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, I would think it's. Do you think it's a must win?
I do. I feel like, they've played okay and at times this season and not okay at other times. And it's time for them to start playing better than worse. And, some of the stuff that's happened this year is kind of it's been more your opponent, but they're at home and they've always historically been done well at home. And that's they really need this one. It feels like they really need to have a good showing and really need a win in a bad way. So that's where I'm
Yeah,
at.
it's interesting. Yeah, I always the home field thing is it can't
Yeah.
be
Home
overstated with how
treat, the
much
home
success
treat.
they've had there. Yeah,
And
right. So, and that's part of why I guess of those three games we talked about, there's only one home. But the idea that this is looking way too far ahead, but facing Tulane on a Thursday
yep,
night, coming out of a bye week at home, is that a game that like that's like Memphis last year,
right.
where you think that there's a huge gap between the teams, and then they jump up and get one at home against a team that people think they're better than. So I don't think that they've played so poorly to this point that a result like that is just out of the question, or that they couldn't pull something like that or find their stride. It was just again, they were very close to winning this game, and the conversation would be different, just like they were very close to losing Colorado State, and the
Yeah.
conversation would be different. And you can play that game for a lot of games that they've played in Jeff Traylor's tenure here.
I just think now more than ever, the margin for error is razor thin. And to your point, in the past, they've had a little bit more margin and they've come out with the wins and now they're 1-2 this year. And even dating back to last year, they weren't great in these close games. So how do they adapt? How do they change that? I think they gotta figure that out. And I think that's what we'll see what the rest of the future of this season holds because I really do think they have an opportunity to get bowl eligible, but I could also see the flip side where it's hard to see them winning that gauntlet of games we talked about. So that's where
Yeah,
I'm at.
if they lose to Rice, give me all the panic. Bring me every last bit of panic at that point. But I think they're still in range of having a pretty decent year.
It's Greg Luca, the voice of reason for the UTSA faithful. Real quick, Greg, I appreciate you jumping on. How was your trip to Philly? I know it's kind of logistics and long travel there.
Yeah, I understand why you didn't go. It's an expensive trip relative to a lot of the other ones, even though it's a major city and usually it's pretty manageable. But yeah, it was all right. I wasn't there super long. I did get a cheesesteak, and that's what you have to do, I guess. So it was funny. I tried to figure out if I could go to so they play at the Lincoln Financial Field, which is right across the street from where the Otani was in town. The Dodgers and Phillies had a playoff game, and cheapest tickets were $360
Oof.
for standing room. So I did not do that, but it probably worked out for the best because I had a really early flight Sunday morning. So yeah, pretty sound trip. Nothing too crazy to report.
I appreciate you covering the video this week. I know there was a lot of feedback on that, negative, positive, whatever. I appreciate the fans' sentiment and making suggestions for questions. Obviously, a lot of times we focus on the key storylines and what we think is important. But to your point earlier in the video, keep sending those questions in, and we'll do our best to try and figure out the best way to ask them, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff that people, well, first of all, it's written in moments of emotion and passion, and so it
Right.
intentionally probably comes off a little harsher than they would say it the next day. But it also, you just have to be careful. Some of these things, either you don't want to ask a question where there's only one possible answer, and you know that
Yes.
coming in, and you also there's a just a level of respect that you would hopefully treat any human in your life with, to not talk to them like they're an idiot. So, some of them we touch it up or we take the ideas and try to go a different way with them, but we're listening to you guys.
Yep. I think that'll wrap it up, Greg. We'll get back at it tomorrow with practice interviews and see what the week holds. And big game at the Alamo Dome on Saturday. So, appreciate you guys watching. Real quick, I just saw expressnews.com, 99 cents for 6 months to sign up for
Ooh.
Greg's website. So y'all be sure to check that out. I'm JJ Perez, Inside Runner Sports, Greg Lucas, Antonio Express News. Thanks for watching, everyone.